Welcome back from the break. You're watching NewsX. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. Our big focus this hour. Donald Trump has signed an executive order to place duties of 10% on all imports from China and 25% on imports from Mexico and Canada. But energy imported from Canada, including oil, natural gas and electricity, would be taxed at 10%. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced his government will impose 25% tariffs on American goods worth $155 billion Canadian dollars in retaliation now. Meanwhile, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has announced that Mexico would impose retaliatory tariffs and take other measures to protect its interests. China also vowed to counter-measure and pledged to file WTO case and said that Trump's announcement seriously violates the rules of the World Trade Organization. Joining us live at this point is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, former diplomat. Also with us, Mitali Nikore, economist. Rabinder Sachdev, international affairs expert, is joining us live. Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, is also with us on the broadcast. Professor Nalapat, let me begin with you first. This is clearly, of course, finally Donald Trump acting what he had threatened to do earlier in his campaign. What do you make of these tariffs that have been implemented now?
Well, frankly, Uday, it's very difficult to understand the reports I am reading is that the tariffs are 25% on Canada and Mexico and 10% on China. Now, if you look at it in purely economic terms, the surplus exports of China, if you include goods produced in third countries and exported to the US, passing off as from those countries, when they're actually Chinese exports, it will be well in excess of $1 trillion, which I think will be more than the total deficits of Mexico and, and Canada. And may I say, a lot of that deficit may be caused by the fact that US companies are basically exporting their own products into the United States. And I mean, so essentially, you are basically taxing US companies. So if you look at it in a geopolitical way, Canada and Mexico are allies of the United States. Canada is a NATO ally. China is an adversary. So having frankly, when you compare the tariff structures, having a relatively higher tariff structure on a country with much less of a trade surplus, the United States, and a country that is much less, much more geopolitically friendly to the United States, I'm not sure what sense it makes. I mean, and I think we in India need to prepare for the same thing. Although I think we can talk in terms of, increasing exports of defense equipment from the US, etc., provided a large part of that is produced in India. You have to have production in different countries. You can't have all the production in one country, or finally the item will cost nearly twice what it should be costing the consumer. So frankly, Uday, it's very difficult for me to find the logic in the tariffs that have been announced by President Trump. No doubt there will be some logic in it, but I only hope that some of the whisperers in his ear are not actually working on behalf of China, because judging by this particular move, I'm not sure that the Chinese are going to be hurt very badly, and certainly allies are going to be extremely upset. Uday.
Yes, Mitali Nikore, let me quickly draw you in here as well, Mitali, because we're seeing a mini trade war also erupt with now, after this announcement by the US President Donald Trump, immediate reactions, of course, have come in from Canada and Mexico, threatening of retaliation. In fact, Justin Trudeau has already announced a similar tariff on American goods, and China has also claimed that this is violative of WTO principles.
Absolutely, absolutely, Uday. I actually completely agree with Professor Nalapat that it's actually a mysterious move to try and punish those allies with whom the US has been, having a very close trade relationship over the last decade or even more. And, even in his previous avatar, President Trump had actually removed the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA. And now it was being renegotiated during the Biden regime, which of course didn't reach any conclusion. And in this scenario, again, the president has gone and said, tariffs are a mechanism that he's using to punish neighboring countries for the immigration or the illegal immigration that's coming into the US. And he's saying that because countries like Mexico and Canada are, in a way, facilitating this illegal immigration, and, even Canada is actually letting illegal immigrants in, and Mexico, of course, we know is one of those routes. Therefore, I'm going to go ahead and punish them more. And even yesterday, I was actually watching a very deep documentary, a very clear documentary about how Canada and China are both circumventing these tariffs by investing in third countries, Eastern Asian countries like Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, benefiting a lot from investments coming from Chinese manufacturers to then export to the US. So I'm not exactly sure whether these measures against China, for instance, will actually be will have the impact that he desires in terms of improving American competitiveness.
Yes, Ambassador Kapoor, let me quickly draw you in here. Ambassador Kapoor, at the end of the day, this was to be expected. It shouldn't come as a surprise. But now that this decision has been officially announced, notified, and implemented by the Trump administration, what are its ramifications going to be?
Thank you, Uday. See, the process of tariffs, uh, you know, takes place between countries when there is difficulties in trade, when there's imbalance of trade, when there's dumping with lower pricing, or in a situation like this, where you want to curtail the imports or make it more difficult for the imports from some countries or make it pricier. Now, it has different sorts of impacts depending on at what price point the imports continue. Because if the trader who's bringing in the goods into the US, for example, in this case, he has to pay that extra tariff. And if the price of that good is from China or Canada or Mexico, depending upon the tariff rate, because it's 25% for most goods from Mexico now, 25% from quite a few goods from Canada, except energy imports are going to be 10%, and China is going to be hit with another increase of 10% beyond what was already the case. So something which was $100 earlier will now cost $125 at the point of entry. That $25 extra or $110, $10 extra goes to the US Treasury. So the Treasury in the US benefits. Now, what happens to the item? The person who's selling it is now not able to sell that sort of quantity from whether it's China, Mexico, Canada, because other competitors are able to sell the same item at a lower price. Quality is something which is a variable, which can be good, which can be worse, which can be better. Now, what happens finally is that if the local industry manufacturing capacity takes up the challenge and starts manufacturing those items in the US at a lower cost, then it is of benefit to the US because you have more employment, more job creation, more turnover in the business cycles here. So it can have different sorts of impacts. Unfortunately, the analysis in the mainstream media all over the world is looking at it in very narrow terms as a thing which will result in inflation, which will result in price increase. Of course, that may be the initial impact, because till you settle down, till the seller also, for example, he sees that now his item is uncompetitive in the market. So either he can reduce the price or he can try to supply it through other countries like our previous panelists have said, or the buyer can source it from some other countries. So there are all sorts of, there are many different parameters which play into this. So it depends what happens ultimately, because if, it's a trade-off between trading and manufacturing. Now, if that results in more manufacturing industry being revived in the US, because over the years, because of dumping, because of selling of items at very low prices, a lot of the manufacturing capacities of America have vanished or have been reduced to the extent that if you go to Amazon or even a hard store on store on the corner, you find a lot of the goods are from China. Now, if you are able to go back and start reviving your own manufacturing, it will have a long-term positive impact to the US economy. So one has to see how the reaction plays out, how the people respond to that, whether they bring back their own manufacturing skills and industries and capacities and job creation and lower pricing, or they just continue to source it from other countries at a lower price. But all the same, the treasury in the US will get more money. That is one of the immediate outcomes. Inflation may increase if there are not enough competitors who are willing to sell the same item at a lower price, or if the same country does not decrease the price. So the end user, the customer, the consumer, for some time will be impacted by it directly in terms of higher pricing. Back to you there.
Let me also quickly now draw in Robinder Sachdev. Robinder, now, of course, this is something that was to be expected, as I said earlier, but how are you now expecting this to play out with immediate retaliation measures announced by, of course, Canada and these big statements being made by the heads of state of China and Mexico?
Thank you very much, Uday. I mean, a fantastic, fantastic case study. If ever there would be anything in economics, we will see play out. One, you know, summarizing the point of view, I think many of us have, or it seems to be out there, the Wall Street Journal, which is a pure free markets, happy-go, conservative newspaper, their lead editorial yesterday was the dumbest trade deal in history. Or the dumbest tariffs in history. That's what the Wall Street Journal is calling it. So that's one element out there. Excuse me. And all of that. However, you know, there's another thing to what Trump is looking at, from what I see maybe is, he is looking at, as I think briefly mentioned by one of our colleagues on the panel, he is looking at tariffs not as a punishment, okay, punishing. He's looking at them as a source of revenue. Okay, that's what he is looking at. And you will see that he has announced the formation of an external revenue service, right? You know, a counterpart to the internal revenue service. So there's an external revenue service being set up or already been set up in the US, which Trump is looking at. So that indicates that the tariffs that he's talking about, and obviously, you know, his advisors, we may be criticizing, we just do not know what the mystery is. But I would logically assume that his advisors have game planned the whole thing per their prism of the world, right? And in their prism and their economics, this will benefit the US. That's what they think. But it's a huge, huge gamble. At least that's what it seems. But Trump is going ahead with it. And also, you see, tariffs you impose, as said earlier, sometimes to punish, signal, and you roll back. You know, like, okay, I've announced 25, something happens, okay, 10 or removed. At present, it seems that Trump is not in that mood. So these tariffs may continue for some time. It's not that I think maybe, I don't know what, see, how can Canada justify that it has stopped the fentanyl and immigrants within 1 week? Canada cannot justify that. So if Canada can, or the US cannot say that, you know, no more fentanyl coming, no more immigrants coming from Canada, okay, things are fine, we are back to business as usual. That cannot happen overnight or even in months. So there is no face saving also if you want to go back. If Trump wants to kind of, you know, go back, he has to, you know, tell his MAGA base and America that I've accomplished what I set out to do. So it seems that, I mean, in one perspective to me, that these tariffs are here to stay or will stay. Retaliations would follow from Canada, from Mexico. What happens from China will follow. One key metric to watch out will be, of course, the Wall Street, the stock markets. Trump looks at stock markets more than anything else. If the stock markets, you know, kind of move along, glide along, he'll persist. But if there's some earthquake kind of thing on the stock markets, then, you know, that's the only time I think he'll think of rethinking something. But as of now, I think we are headed for a roller coaster. And the other countries in the, I mean, he's talking European Union. Okay, he talked yesterday, also coming for European Union, coming for India. So it's coming. So it's basically on the one hand, sure, welcome. It's a reset, re-equilibrium making. Fine, let's all sit down and, you know, look at things, you know, in a cold and calculated manner. Let's all do it if that's what's there. But in the process, if the world economy tanks, it affects all of us. If global economy tanks, if America tanks, if China flounders, it affects us in here in India. It affects our, you know, our GDP, you know, our GDP, our inflation, interest rates, our own economy, it will impact in a big way if things go out of hand.
Yes, let me in fact now take that back to Professor Nalapath. Professor Nalapath, do you believe these tariffs will continue for now despite these retaliatory measures announced by Canada and Mexico? And also, do you see more tariffs coming soon?
Look, Uday, the fact of the matter is where both fentanyl and illegal immigration is concerned, authorities in the United States need to gear up. And I'm happy to say that under the people such as Mr. Homan, I mean, they have geared up and they are being very, very firm on entry of illegals into the United States. And I believe that is going to be a trickle, not because of anything that's done by Canada or Mexico, but essentially by the good work done by the US Department of Homeland Security and the Border Patrol. Fentanyl is also an important issue. But don't forget, Uday, fentanyl is linked very closely with other narcotics and with crime. Fentanyl is basically from China. Gangs are the ones involved in fentanyl. The Chinese state, the Chinese Communist Party, they're not involved. Criminal gangs are involved who are basically given protection. And these gangs form, gangs of locals in Canada. We've seen that now in the case of Justin Trudeau's Canada, how many gangs have been formed. And also in the case of Mexico. So these are gangsters. And frankly, it's going to be a much more difficult issue to rein them in. And of course, in case Mexico and Canada try to rein them in, that's very, very good news. They have succeeded to some extent in reining in the flow of illegal migration to the US. If they can do that in the case of fentanyl, it's very welcome. But I would only like to say that it's a very complicated matter because it involves organized crime syndicates, and these are not absent in the United States as well. You'll remember that, prohibition, it caused a huge spurt in the mafia and organized crime in the United States, just as it did in India, frankly. Look, this reminds me too much of 100 years ago, of the beggar my neighbor policies of 100 years ago. And ultimately, we ended up in the Great Recession. So very frankly, Uday, I think, negotiate, yes, but impose is one thing and negotiation is another. This is, as has correctly been said by another discussant, a huge gamble. And if the gamble works, well and good. I mean, but if the gamble does not work, then you're going to lead to a rift between the US and its allies to the benefit of China, and you're going to lead to fentanyl continuing to flow through criminal gangs. And frankly, I still reiterate that allies need to be treated differently from adversaries. And that has to be kept in mind by Donald Trump, because we are facing the prospect of a kinetic war involving possibly Taiwan or some other places. And the more the US gets preoccupied with its own internal problems, the more the Chinese leadership will feel emboldened to carry it out in the belief that, well, now the US is too distracted. Other countries are too distracted and they're all fighting each other to bother about us. And they'll try and make a grab for Taiwan. So quite frankly, Uday, it's a very huge gamble. And these are gambles that need to be very carefully thought out. And frankly, it's better to announce a tariff rather than impose a tariff. Announce and negotiate. Impose and negotiate, both sides are not doing the same. And the Chinese are not talking of any tariffs. They're going to WTO. Of course, the US is not going to bother about the WTO, at least under President Trump. But the fact of the matter is, I do not want to see a repeat of the 1920s, when you had an all-out trade war between countries that are supposed to be friendly countries. And ultimately what happened? A very, very hostile power to both sides who were fighting emerged and created mayhem throughout the world. Thank you, Uday.
All right, let me quickly, in fact, take that across to Mitali Nikore once again. Mitali, also, as far as trade is concerned, what impact is this likely to have on the US's trading relationship with multiple other nations? And also, at the end of the day, of course, do you see these tariffs continuing long term, or are they just a short term measure by Trump to, declare that he means business?
Thanks a lot, Uday. I think I'd like to point out one thing which we have not discussed yet, which is around energy tariffs, right? The goods that are coming from Canada, a large proportion of that basket actually involves oil imports from Canada to the US. And the tariff rate for this has been set at 10% as a separate tariff and not at 25% as the general tariff, which has been imposed for all Canadian products to the US. So that's a very important exemption that that the president has provided for Canadian oil imports, and in fact that also applies to the imports that are coming from Mexico. Second is to look at the interesting reaction that's come from Canada, right? They have gone ahead and imposed some tariffs on US products, but China has not. China is still, refraining from making any retaliatory move. They are adopting a wait and watch approach, and in fact, they are approaching this in a very pragmatic way, saying, you know what, let him go ahead and put this in place. He has to show this to his electorate. But we, on the other hand, will continue to export to the US consumer through other means, like through other markets and through third country exports. So I feel that here the biggest winner is going to be those third countries to whom, who are benefiting from these new manufacturing facilities that are being set up. Countries like in East Asia, where, I'm hearing reports of wage rates actually going up amongst manufacturing sector workers and new manufacturing opportunities coming up. India, Bangladesh, and other countries in South Asia, though Bangladesh at this point is still in a difficult situation, but at least other countries in South Asia can also stand to benefit from these re-engineered supply chains, and even companies in Europe, if they start facing those tariffs, will again start looking at third country options. So I feel that this is the whole impact is going to be, number one, benefits for third countries. Number two, the biggest loser is going to be the US consumer, because at the end of the day, it's not like the US can overnight develop manufacturing capabilities to completely overhaul its consumption system and overhaul its supply chains in such a way that everything is made in the USA. So the US consumer is going to be impacted. And the third thing, as Mr. Sajdev very rightly said, at the end of the day, for the president, what happens in the stock markets is important. So if this spurs a whole, decline in the economy, a decline in private consumption, a decline in investment activity, then the markets are going to be spooked, and he will then have to roll it back. So I feel that the length and duration of these tariffs is then going to be dependent on how the markets react and how the stock market activity is impacted by this tariff movement. But I feel the biggest loser, definitely the US consumer, and not the intended loser, that is the People's Republic of China.
Okay. What about, the impact now on India? How should India be viewing all of these developments, Robinder, that are taking place? So far, of course, India not in the list of countries, where these tariffs have been announced.
No, thank you very much. How India should be looking, I would assume, is that picking up on the point from Mitali, India should be spotting opportunities. There is chaos, there is mayhem happening and coming up ahead. India should be setting up an America tracking unit 24/7, tracking and seeing what's happening, which policies where, what is running top on Trump's agenda, and what is affecting what where. I mean, between Canada, America, okay, what is the trade? Okay, Canada, let's say, supplies a lot of lumber, right? Fair enough, 25% tariff gone up. In case India had, or we had, lumber, could we have exported to the US at a lower price compared to the Canadians? We have to seek out such opportunities. That's what countries have to do. So this will be, yes, this is a hugely disruptive thing, but there is opportunities, and it's survival of the fittest. Whoever is the more nimble, who can move more quickly, will benefit. The more, whichever nation kind of sticks around and thinks, okay, what next, the smarter players would come in and would be making their own supply chains, figuring their ways out. I think that's what is happening and India should be doing. Now, one. Secondly, yes, in the overall sense, what the US is doing, I mean, is it headed towards a train wreck? We don't know. But yes, Trump looks at it as, creating dollars for the treasury, which actually links up to a few other things. The US is running a trade deficit, not trade, sorry, budget deficit overall, right? They want to bring that down. They may have done calculations, okay, this much money would come in from the tariffs. Now we can look at a lower interest rate, right? We have a lower debt, lower interest rate, and therefore its impact on the macro economy. So I think that is the cycle that his team is looking at. They're also looking at, because all of this is then again linked to, dollar is the reserve currency.
Yes.
If there are tariffs being set up left, right, and center, the non-tariff or the tariff-affected countries, we could be doing more trade in our local currencies, etc., and trying to push the dollar out.
Okay, Ambassador
For
Kapoor,
that-
last word to you. How do you see this going forward?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Uday?
How do you see this going forward? I'm giving the last word to you. I'm almost out of time.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, the Prime Minister of India is going to be visiting USA very soon, probably within the next, 10 days or so. So it will be a very important visit for India to have very detailed discussions, because India has already reduced tariffs on a range of goods which the US had been demanding during the first tenure of the President Trump. So India is trying to play ball with the US. India has the potential and the capacity and the manufacturing capabilities to step up in many areas. In some areas, they may require to again collaborate with some other countries. Now, the oil exported to Europe and USA is an interesting example. The Russian oil comes into India, it is refined and processed, some value addition is
Yes.
done. Then it is re-exported
Okay.
to the European Western countries. Similarly, can we set up supply chains
Right.
where we are able to fill in those gaps at a competitive price and garner a share of the
Right. So it
market?
is an opportunity for India, is what you're clearly saying, and we should take it that way. Let's leave it at that. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us. Let's take a break.